So I just recently watched Promised Neverland, an anime about the beauty and joy of raising children in an orphanage to later be eaten by demons. And I have a theory, and it makes a lot of sense, and it makes the show so much more fucked up to watch and that much more interesting. So I'm gonna talk about it. First, let's introduce some of the characters that are really important to the story. Ray is this gloomy emo kid who's really smart. Norman is this really white boy, which he's white, who is also really smart. And then finally, our protagonist, Emma, a very athletic, kind of, I don't know, ditzy girl who is very smart. They're all really smart. Then there is Mom, who is a quiet, kind of mysterious woman who runs the orphanage. Her sole goal is just to raise these almost 40 kids to have the happiest and healthiest life they possibly can. Then there's Grandmother, who is a woman dressed in all black, who is responsible for the moms of the other orphanages. I think there's 5. Basically, she is the manager and the moms are the supervisors of the kids. Then we have Corona, I don't know if it's Corona or Corona, who is confused. It seems like she has some kind of psychotic something going on with her, but yeah, that's Corona. She likes to sing and dance, and she wants to betray Mom and take over raising the kids to be eaten by the demons. Which brings us to the last people or characters, the demons. And with that should be all the major players we need to finally start discussing this theory. Next thing I want to say is I want to clarify I have not seen or read the manga, so whatever happens there, it's purely my theory. First thing is, why are these kids in an orphanage? Well, why are kids in orphanages? Normally it's because they were either given up or removed from their families, or their families are unfortunately dead. But we later see this is not necessarily the case with some of these kids in this orphanage. The moms who are running the orphanages, who are giving the kids away to the demons that are responsible for producing those kids. When Ray confronts Isabella, the mom of Farm 3, Site 3, saying, "Mom, why did you have me?" And she says something along the lines of like, "I did it for myself," or "I did it so I can survive," something like that. I will try and find a clip and put it. Ray's mom is the same mom that tries to give him up to be eaten by demons. Even if it wasn't her kid, you gotta ask the question, why would you give up a kid to be eaten by demons? Especially a kid that you've raised. Why would you give them up to be eaten? It just seems like too much of a burden. Well, if you didn't have a choice and it was between that and torture, the choice is made a little bit more simpler. But even still, consciously feeding kids must take an immense toll on the person's psyche, not unless they've seen something so much worse. We see that the moms and the sisters and the grandmothers are completely complacent in giving up these kids to be eaten. And logically, even if you are being tortured, you would still have some sort of moral dilemma developing in you. But there's not one here. It's a very matter of fact, this is the way of life. These kids are going to be eaten. So why is it like that? Well, what if you saw something so much worse? What if feeding kids to demons was actually an act of mercy? But what could be worse than literally raising kids up to be eaten alive? Watching all of humanity suffer and be tortured. And it truly is just hopeless. There is absolutely nothing you can do. And that's kind of the crux of the theory, is there is this running theme of hopelessness inside the anime. And if the situation in the anime is truly hopeless, it would make it a lot easier to give up these kids. Which brings in my theory. The show takes place after the rapture. My theory is that there was kind of like a moral battle between heaven and hell, or the Holy Church and Satan, and the church lost. The church lost because they kept perpetuating deception, not giving to the poor, and just generally not practicing what they preached. Having giant gold effigies and idols, all these other things that generally the Bible tends to not condone. The rapture is when God comes down and takes all the souls that they've deemed worthy of mercy and brings them up to heaven, and basically leaves earth and all the remaining to the will of the devil, and he closes the gates to heaven. So essentially, anyone left behind has been completely abandoned by God, which, if that happens, life is one thing. You can make of it what you will, but if you have actual evidence and proof and knowledge that heaven and hell exist, demons and angels exist, God and the devil exist, and you know that God has left you, the existentialism in that is just immense. There is no hope. There is no more God. There is no more heaven. That ship has sailed. And anyone else who remains, that's it. You're there to suffer. Which brings up this question. Well, it is people who are here, and the natural, and human nature is to procreate, to make offspring. But if heaven is closed off and humanity is still left down here, and humanity has the ability to procreate, well, what happens to the children that are left here? They'd be still cut off from heaven. Heaven is closed off from all of earth and all of humanity. Anyone that was left behind, that's it. So the children would not have access to heaven, which is exceedingly unfair. So my theory is part of the rapture is the rest of humanity that is left there, that is supposed to be left behind, has been sterilized. Maybe, biologically, or maybe there was even some angels that came down and performed the surgery. But in either case, I think that the rest of humanity was sterilized. So that way there can be no more kids produced on earth and then cut off from heaven, because what would be the point of being born just to literally suffer your entire life for all of eternity? So ideally, everyone that was supposed to be on earth has been sterilized. No more kids, can't bring new life. New life can't be held on earth to suffer. That's my theory. And say my theory is correct, and we take the notion of the church that failed, the church that was supposed to be righteous, the church and the church members that were supposed to ideally be raptured and go up into heaven, they would probably not have been sterilized, because that's a punishment for the people that were deemed unworthy of heaven. And if it was just the church that had failed to win the souls of humanity for God, well, part of their punishment would be to just stay here. That would be the devil's, response to that. They are essentially POWs. But if they were supposed to go to heaven, then they would not have been sterilized. So my theory is that the Pope, nuns, cardinals, everyone that was supposed to go to heaven, since they were not sterilized, they're the only ones that can still have kids in this promised Neverland, and they can continue creating children and offspring after the rapture. They are the only ones that can. And if they failed, they'd be trapped on earth, and the devil is not known for being particularly merciful. So as punishment for the devil, he forces them to continue making kids, raising these kids to then be devoured by demons and the devil himself. And how does this make sense? Well, we know that the moms are forced to raise these kids, forced to produce these kids, and then they are forced to give up these kids. We know this because later on in the season, Isabella is talking about how when she was trying to recruit Emma, she's saying, I want you to be the mom of this house. First thing you got to do is you got to make a baby, then you got to do training, then you can be the mom. And then we also know Isabella was pregnant with Ray. So they are forced to have kids in order to become moms of the house. We know that they are there consistently, constantly raising these kids, taking care of these kids until the moment that they die. How do you forego the human nature to try and protect these kids? You deprive the person who's protecting these kids, who's supposed to be protecting these kids, of their autonomy and their humanity. One way is to rip out their uterus, so that way they have no will to continue on. And so that's how they keep the mothers there, because they only need them to make one, so that way we can move forward and just raise these kids without the will to be a mother. Through these kids, because they're still cut off from heaven, but they were born completely innocent from, members of the church, they would not be sterilized because they are purely innocent. They are brand new souls. And then you kind of have this ability to create this cycle of raise these kids, make one have another kid, and then they raise more kids. It all just kind of perpetuates this cycle. And I believe the idea is you want to keep the babies as innocent as possible for as long as possible, because ideally the more experienced the soul is but still residing in that purity state is the more desired soul. That brings the question, why do I think it's a soul? Especially when they specified that they just eat the brain. Well, if the concern was eating a brain, a fully developed brain would be most desirable, right? Then they should and would let these kids fully develop. Full development for everyone is by the age of 25 years old. But they choose to eat them specifically at 12. 12 is the oldest they go. After that, that's prime pickings, and you ship them out, they get eaten. What do we know that happens around the age of 12? Puberty. I know puberty happens earlier for some people, later for other people, but generally speaking, it is puberty in boys and girls that starts by the age of 12, and they start developing hormones and attractions, and essentially their purity and their arguable innocence is derailed by the natural desire for another human being, which is why we see them end at 12. It's, hey, like, before you start acting on these very natural desires, it's, we are going to kill you and eat your soul, because it's the most innocent it could possibly be if we're taking a very conservative approach of viewing a soul. A lot of people would argue that a soul is the culmination of people's thoughts, experiences, and emotions. All those things that make up what a person is, thoughts, experiences, and emotions, reside inside our heads. It's not our hearts, it's not our livers, it's not anywhere else, it's our heads. It's a chemical reaction to our situations and to our environments. Which is why, if we're eating the brain, the thoughts, emotions, and experiences of a person, we're essentially taking the person's soul, which is why they want the brain, not any other part of the body, not even the rest of the body. It's specifically the brain, which is why when we saw Ray and he had set himself on fire in that one scene, it was, I gotta protect the brain. If I can just protect the brain, then I'm good. Everyone in the show, every human in the show, I should say, aside from grandmother, is essentially cattle, and the show shows that pretty affirmatively, whether that be through the moms, the sisters, the kids. They serve one function, and that is to be cattle. You have cattle to eat, you have cattle to breed, and obviously that's very disheartening, being essentially livestock. And for those who knew, they would likely break down, which is what we saw with Krona. She was born into this system. This system has been going on for a very long time. She went through the entire thing of being raised up under this guise of having a happy life and eventually going to a family, only to find out at the last second that she was going to be eaten. What happens is she doesn't get eaten. She actually gets recommended to go into training to be a mom, and with that she has to go knowing that the rest of her siblings have gone through that fate. They have gone with the promise of, I'm finally getting adopted, I'm finally being raised by a family who loves me, and then finding out that you're going to die and be eaten. That's horrible. But then she also has to now go and train to do that same exact thing to kids that were just like her, because it was either that or die, because now you know the truth and we can't let you spreading that to the rest of the kids and causing panic and emotional distress with these kids, because they have to be raised happy and healthy. That's two of the very specific parameters, happy and healthy. And as we know, part of her training to become a mom is you have to be bred. It's fucked up to say, but she has to be bred. She has to have a kid. She has to have an offspring that would then be taken away, so that way they could raise kids knowing that they're gonna die, but still doing it completely detached from them or protective over them. I believe that also the sterilization comes into play in building up that hopelessness and loss of autonomy, like I was saying before. Unfortunately, that would most likely cause a break in a lot of people, which is what I think we saw in Krona, which is why she was overly attached to this fragmented baby doll that she had through her entire childhood, because that was the only thing she was allowed to get attached to. Every time a child left, they took a toy with them. They made a very good point about specifying that, because there was a room full of toys, I will put it here, that they brought when they were ideally going to be adopted, and then when they died, they stored the toy. Because Krona went to training, she got to keep her toy. That was literally the only thing. She could not be attached to people, she could not be attached to kids, she could not be attached to her own kid. That was the only thing she could be attached to. I'm sure even the person that they forced her to breed with was also just another act of labor, literally, and she could not be attached to them. And being attached to this baby doll makes it a lot easier to just kind of pick up your life and go wherever they tell you to go, because you have that thing with you. All of the children she comes in contact with, she knows are going to die in a horrible death. And all the friends that she grew up with have died. And her child that she gave birth to was taken away and died. She chooses to take care of this toy as a substitute for the child that she birthed and willingly sacrificed to be eaten by demons out of her own self-preservation, because realistically she could do nothing in her situation. She could not provide the protection that child needed, and for Corona, the doll is her baby, and she takes care of it so that way she feels like she might have been a good mother, which is what she is very adamant about in the show. She knows she can be a good mother. She knows she can provide a happy life for these kids. But she hates the system. Everyone hates the system. Isabella, the kids, Corona, they all hate it. But yet they still abide by it. And the question is why? Well, if we see, it's these running themes of hopelessness. There is nothing you can do to change the system. They all say that. They're like, I'll give you all the information you want about how to escape, about what's going on, and you're not gonna do shit about it because you are stuck here. We are all stuck in this situation because there's nothing we can do. We have no power. And she understands that she can't change this system, so she decides that being a mom is the closest thing she can do to feeling human. And that is a direct quote from Corona. And it is the strongest and easiest connection to understand how much like cattle they are, because this is the only thing she can do to not feel like it. But going back, all the way back to talking about 2014, we know that Corona is 26, the year is 2045. We know that Isabella, who was also born into the system, the mom of Site 3, is 31. Still, the year is 2045. If you do that math, comes out to Isabella was born in 2014. She was already born into this system, so that means it's been going on at least since 2014. So most likely it started sometime before 2014. What do we know that was supposed to happen prior to 2014? Well, in 2012, according to the Mayan calendars, the world was supposed to end. And according to biblical literature, when the world ends, it is the rapture. The grandmother was part of the church and was left behind. I think she was either a nun or a mother superior or something like that, which is why she wears all black, not just for the death of the church, but for the death of humanity, and her humanity specifically, because she is cold and ruthless. She does not give a shit about any of these kids, any of the moms, anyone. She does not care. She knows that it is hopeless and this is the way life is now. The children, however, wear all white, which is a sign of innocence. The more innocent the soul, the more tasty it is. And keeping them as pure as possible, both literally and symbolically, would probably have an effect on the value of the soul. Another way of thinking about it is that one prayer about, make me as clean as wool, or as white as wool, something like that. We have that quote from the Bible saying, like, clean me. And then specifically in Japanese culture, white is symbolic of purity and good times, which again, these kids are meant to be raised up with purity and good times. Like, they're literally supposed to be happy, healthy, and smart. Well, ideally smart, but with the idea of preservation of their souls. Last thing is, in the Christian and Catholic religion, there is this idea that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came down to earth and sacrificed himself to pay for the sins of humanity. Essentially a promise that, hey, like, if you just accept me and embrace me, you can get into heaven. I promise you salvation. I promise you heaven. The rapture, however, is when heaven and God are cut off. They're saying, hey, you had your chance. That's it. It's done. Deadline's here. And the rest of humanity that stays, they just remain on earth and get tortured for all eternity. So essentially, heaven is a land we could no longer reach. A land we were promised, but is now gone and inaccessible for any humans. A essentially promised Neverland. If you made it this far, I just want to say thank you for sticking around. I sincerely mean that. I spent a lot of time editing these videos, and it really does mean a lot for you guys to just stick around and watch. please, if you would be so kind, subscribe. Yes, this is begging, but I don't really give a shit, because just seeing my views go up to double digits is just really special to me. So if we can get those double digits a little bit higher, that'd be really cool. I'm trying to get one video out a week, but you know, it's gonna be, I have to pace myself. So yeah, hopefully I'll be going back to vlogs soon. We'll figure this out together. You know, it's a journey. But like I said, thank you guys, if you made it this far, for watching. I sincerely appreciate that, and I appreciate you. You guys are awesome, and peace.